When we see a person walking down the street talking to himself, we generally assume that he is mentally ill, provided he's not wearing a headset of some kind. But we all talk to ourselves constantly. Most of us merely have the good sense to keep our mouths shut. We rehearse past conversations, thinking about what we said, what we didn't say, what we should have said. We anticipate the future, producing a ceaseless string of words and images that fill us with hope or fear. We tell ourselves the story of the present, as though some blind person were inside our heads who required continuous narration to know what is happening. Wow, nice desk. I wonder what kind of wood that is. Oh, but it has no drawers. They didn't put drawers in this thing? How can you have a desk without at least one drawer? Who are we talking to? No one else is there. And we seem to imagine that if we just keep this inner monologue to ourselves, it is perfectly compatible with mental health. Perhaps it isn't. As I was working to finish this book, we experienced a series of plumbing leaks in our house. The first appeared in the ceiling of a storage room. We consider ourselves genuinely lucky to have found it, because this was a room we might have gone months without entering. A plumber arrived within a few hours, cut the drywall, and fixed the leak. A plasterer came the next day, repaired the ceiling, and painted it. This sort of thing happens eventually in every home, I told myself, and my prevailing feeling was of gratitude. Civilization is a wonderful thing. Then a similar leak appeared in an adjacent room a few days later. Contact information for both the plumber and the plasterer was at my fingertips. Now I felt only annoyance and foreboding. A month later, the horror movie began in earnest. A pipe burst, flooding 600 square feet of ceiling. This time the repair took weeks and created an immense amount of dust. 2 cleaning crews were required to deal with the aftermath, vacuuming hundreds of books, drying and shampooing the carpet, and so forth. Throughout all this, we were forced to live without heat, for otherwise the dust from the repair would have been sucked into the vents, and we would have been breathing it in every room of the house. Eventually, however, the problem was fixed. We would have no more leaks. And then last night, scarcely 1 month after the previous repair, we heard the familiar sound of water falling onto carpet. The moment I heard the first drops, I was transformed into a hapless, uncomprehending, enraged man racing down a staircase. I'm sure I would have comported myself with greater dignity had I come upon the scene of a murder. A glance at the ballooning ceiling told me everything I needed to know about the weeks ahead. Our home would be a construction site once again. Of course, a house is a physical object beholden to the laws of nature, and it won't fix itself. From the moment my wife and I grabbed buckets and salad bowls to catch the falling water, we were responding to the ineluctable tug of physical reality. But my suffering was entirely the product of my thoughts. Whatever the needs of the moment, I had a choice. I could do what was required calmly, patiently, and attentively, or do it in a state of panic. Every moment of the day, indeed every moment throughout one's life, offers an opportunity to be relaxed and responsive, or to suffer unnecessarily. We can address mental suffering of this kind on at least 2 levels. We can use thoughts themselves as an antidote, or we can stand free of thought altogether. The first technique requires no experience with meditation, and it can work wonders if one develops the appropriate habits of mind. Many people do it quite naturally. It's called looking on the bright side. For instance, as I was beginning to rage like King Lear in the storm, my wife suggested that we should be thankful that it was fresh water pouring through our ceiling and not sewage. I found the thought immediately arresting. I could feel in my bones how much better it was to be mopping up water at that moment than to be ankle deep in the alternative. What a relief! I often use thoughts of this kind as levers to pry my mind loose from whatever rut it has found on the landscape of unnecessary suffering. If I had been watching sewage spill through our ceiling, how much would I have paid merely to transform it into fresh water? A lot. I am not advocating that we be irrationally detached from the reality of our lives. If a problem needs fixing, we should fix it. But how miserable must we be while doing good and necessary things? And if, like many people, you tend to be vaguely unhappy much of the time, it can be very helpful to manufacture a feeling of gratitude simply by contemplating all the terrible things that have not happened to you, or to think of how many people would consider their prayers answered if they could only live as you are now. The mere fact that you have the leisure to listen to this book puts you in very rarefied company. Many people on Earth at this moment can't even imagine the freedom that you currently take for granted. In fact, the effects of consciously practicing gratitude have been studied. When compared to merely thinking about significant life events, contemplating daily hassles, or comparing oneself favorably to others. Thinking about what one is grateful for increases one's feelings of well-being, motivation, and positive outlook toward the future. One does not need to know anything about meditation to notice how thinking governs one's mental state. This morning, for instance, I awoke in a state of carefree happiness, and then I remembered the leak. Most readers will be familiar with this experience. Something bad has happened in your life. A person has died, a relationship has ended, you have lost your job. But there's a brief interval after awakening before memory imposes a stranglehold. It often takes a moment or two for one's reasons for being unhappy to come online. Having spent years observing my mind in meditation, I find such sudden transitions from happiness to suffering both fascinating and rather funny, and merely witnessing them goes a long way toward restoring my equanimity. My mind begins to seem like a video game. I can either play it intelligently, learning more in each round, or I can be killed in the same spot by the same monster again and again. Once, while staying in an especially depressing hotel in Kathmandu, I was awakened in the middle of the night by the feeling of a claw scratching my foot. I sat up in terror, convinced that there was a rat in my bed. I had recently learned that the lepers that I had seen throughout my travels in Asia lost their fingers and toes not to the disease itself, but because they could no longer feel pain. This resulted in burns and other injuries. Even worse, rats often ate their extremities while they slept. However, the darkness of my room was perfectly still. It had been only a dream, and as suddenly as it had come, the feeling of terror subsided. My mind and body were now flooded with relief. What a strange dream, I thought. I actually felt a claw on my skin, but nothing was there. The mind is so amazing. And then came the unmistakable sound of something scurrying toward me beneath the sheets. I bounded from the bed with the agility of a Chinese acrobat. After a few interminable moments, spent groping in the darkness of an unfamiliar room, I turned on the lights, and all was silent once again. As I stared at the tangle of blankets on the bed, I genuinely hoped that I had lost my sanity, and not in fact my privacy. I flung back the covers, and there in the middle of the mattress sat a large brown rat. The creature eyed me with a sickening frankness and intensity. It appeared to be standing its ground, no doubt ruing the loss of such an ample source of protein. I feigned an attack of my own, lunging and shrieking, half ape, half cartoon housewife, and the beast raced across the sheets, sprung to the floor, and disappeared behind the dresser. In the span of a few seconds, my mind had traversed the extremes of human emotion, swinging from terror to exquisite relief and back to terror, entirely on the wings of thought. There's a rat in my bed. Oh, it was only a dream. Rat! Again, I'm not saying that one's thoughts about reality are all that matter. I would be the first to admit that it is generally a good idea to keep rats out of one's bed. But it can be liberating to see how thoughts pull the levers of emotion, and how negative emotions in turn set the stage for patterns of thinking that keep them active and coloring one's mind. Seeing this process clearly can mean the difference between being angry, depressed, or fearful for a few moments, and being so for days, weeks, and months on end.